Hello everyone, I'm Christine Rodriguez and we will analyze the short story or the literary piece, The Small Key, written by Paz Latorena. So, without much ado, let's start. Here is the presentation outline that I have prepared. We have here the author, next summary, characters, plot, setting, conflict, theme, style, and point of view. So let's start. Paz Latorena. She was born in Boac, Marinduque in 1907. At a young age, she was brought to Manila where she completed her basic schooling. First at St. Scholastica and later to South High School. So in 1925, she enrolled at the University of the Philippines for a degree in education. So working by day as an elementary school teacher, she attended evening classes. One of these was a short story writing class conducted by Mrs. Paz Marquez Benitez. Her short story entitled The Small Key won third place in Jose Garcia Villa's Roll of Honor for the year's Best Short Stories. So some of her other stories received similar prizes over the next several years. So in her senior year, La Torena transferred to the University of Santo Tomas, from which institution she graduated in 1930 and where she subsequently enrolled for graduate studies. Among her many students were then aspiring writers like Juan Gat Bonton, Shonil Jose, Nita Umali, Genoveva Matute, and Zeneida Amador. In 1953, while proctoring a final examination, Paz suffered a cerebral hemorrhage which proved fatal. So 35 of her stories have recently been collected in a single volume. So this is the Desire and Other Stories, edited by Eva V. Calao. Summary: The Small Key. It is a short story by Filipino author Paz Latorena. It is about a woman named Soledad who is married to a man named Pedro Buhay. It was a warm day on the farm in which a couple lives. One morning, Soledad finds herself knowing that the farm will produce plenty, but that she still had some inner feeling of discontent. She planned to mend some of her husband's shirts, which were in a locked trunk. Pedro took out from his pocket a string which held two keys, one large and shiny, and one small and rusty. Pedro gave to his wife the large key to his trunk on the first instance. Since it was hot that morning, he removed his coat before leaving to work in the field. When he was gone, Soledad began to fold the jacket and the small key fell to the floor. It is obvious that Pedro values the small key while Soledad fears it. She tries to busy herself so that she will not think about what the smaller trunk contains. But she can't stop thinking about it and reveals that the small trunk contains clothing that belonged to Pedro's first wife. She fears that Pedro still loves his first wife even though she's been dead for many years by now. Pedro returns home to find Soledad in bed, supposedly with a fever. It turns out she doesn't. The next morning, Pedro discovers a pile of ashes and half-burnt clothing in the backyard. He realizes what Soledad has done and rushes to look in the trunk to confirm it. Soledad has indeed burned his first wife's clothing. Pedro in return was bitter and was expecting Soledad will talk about the matter. He thinks to himself that he will forgive her because he loves her, but that even if she did it out of love for him, it will always remain a matter of some resentment toward her for doing it. Next, let's get to know the characters of the short story. We have here the main characters and supporting characters. Under main, we have Pedro Buhay. He is also known as Indo in the story. He is the husband of Soledad, a farmer who lives in the farm. He is also a hard-working man, a man whom somehow have an everlasting love to his deceased wife. Next, Soledad. She is also named as Choleng. She is the second wife of Pedro. She is an affectionate woman towards his husband that fears of losing him and the relationship that they have. She is easily carried by her emotions. Next, we have Tia Maria under the supporting characters of the short story. She is the housemaid of Pedro and Soledad. She also took care of Soledad while Pedro isn't at home. Lastly, we have Dr. Santos. He is the doctor of Soledad. Moving on, let's have the plot. We have here the exposition. In the dining table, her husband, Pedro Buhay, is eating in a hurry because he needs to get back to work. Rising action. When Pedro left the coat containing the small key on his coat's pocket and fell it on the floor. Climax. Pedro is on the backyard and saw the half-burned cloth. Falling action. Pedro finds the trunk empty. And Soledad is still ill and Pedro is trying not to be angry to Soledad. Now, let us tackle about the setting of the short story. We have here the time. Early morning. It is because the sun a sky that was blue. And afternoon, since it is a very hot day. Next, we have the place. Farm. It is where the couple live and where the story mostly took place. Second, house. It is located in their farm that is surrounded by wild bamboos. Third, we have the backyard. It is where Soledad burned Pedro's first wife clothes. Now, let's find out the conflict of the story. Man versus self. It is because when Soledad got the small key and pushes herself to open the trunk and saw the cloth of the deceased wife of Pedro. Questions, jealousy, and fear arise from within that causes the conflict. Besides, we have the theme. I came up with 3. So I have here, first love never dies, because Pedro still treasures his first wife's clothes in a trunk and its key had been always with him. Love has secrets, or love has its privacy. Because Pedro did not tell Soledad that he still keeps the clothing of his former wife. She only found it out when Pedro left it. Love has a room of jealousy. It is because Soledad had a feeling and showed envy, for his husband kept the clothes. Furthermore, we have here the styles that the author used to make her masterpiece amazing. So we have here the sound device. Consonants. Even the low square nipa house that stood in unashamed relief against the gray-green haze of grass and leaves. It is apparent that the sound of S are being repeated at the beginning, middle, and end of the said line. Literary device, imagery, visual. There were dark, newly plowed furrows where in due time timorous seedlings would rise to sturdy stalks and golden green, to a rippling yellow sea in the wind and sun during harvest time. Dialogue or verbal irony. How quiet and peaceful the day was. A cow that had strayed by looked over her shoulder with a round vague inquiry and went on chewing her cud, blissfully unaware of such things as a knowing fear in the heart of a woman. and a still smoldering resentment in Amans. This is the utterance of the speaker is different from what he means. Next, we have symbolism, small key. It symbolizes the memories for Pedro. On the other hand, the small key symbolizes anxiety, discomfort, and fear for Soledad. However, it is an opener that Soledad used to free the past feelings Pedro had. Another symbolism of the small key, it is the authority and love of Pedro, while it is the opportunity of Soledad to get rid of the first wife's clothes that bother her so much. Second, we have trunk. It symbolizes Pedro's romantic past, a part of Pedro in which the memories of his dead wife is hidden and still locked. Next, we have ashes of the cloth. It symbolizes or represents jealousy and hatred of Soledad. Lastly, we have cloth of the dead's wife of Pedro. It symbolizes his dead wife in which he still treasures. We have here the last element, which is the point of view. It is in third person, in which Paz Latorena relates all action in third person using the pronouns like he or she. For instance, as she was doing so, a small object fell on the floor with a dull metallic sound. She brushed her tears with the sleeve of her camisa and abruptly stood up. That's all. Thank you for listening. Don't hesitate to ask any questions and clarifications. But before we end this video, I wanted you to ask these questions. Are you with Pedro or Soledad? If you were Soledad, would you do the same? Or if you were Pedro, would you do the same? So let's put it into a simpler situation, or let's say in our situations as a teenagers. Is it okay for you that your boyfriend or girlfriend have a picture of their ex in their phone? Or are you comfortable that your love still treasures the gifts that were given by their ex? So if you answer my questions yes, well, you are brave and strong enough. But for me, I think it's hard, right?